What's up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast. I am Matt Parrino, and that is not Ryan Talbot. That is James Boyd, covers the Indianapolis Colts for The Athletic, kind enough to give us a few minutes of his time today so we can get that first look at the Colts. The Bills go on the road to Indy this weekend. One of my top road destinations. It doesn't happen every year, but I love the combine. I love getting down to Indy, even in the cold weather, getting on the scooter, zipping around town to all the different spots. I'm looking forward to it, man. How are you?
I'm good. Obviously, I don't hear often that Indianapolis is like a destination people want to come to, but it is a good city. I've been here for 4 years myself now. And as you allude to the combine, other things that are down here, that time of the year is always the best, just being from here, because, when you live here, you just know where to park for very cheap, and then you can walk around very easily. As you all know, like when you do the NFL combine, which is why I'm hoping they never move it, it's very, very accessible to just get everywhere you need to go in like 15 minutes on foot.
I'm also a big fan of the Dome Stadium. Getting in there I can't remember. Is Indy open air? I think that's Minnesota.
Minnesota's open air. Indianapolis is not. I was just in Minnesota last week. So it's such a shell shock every time. I think Minnesota, I want to say Vegas and Atlanta has open air, and it's so loud every time.
I know it's kind of like it brings you back to the days when you went as a fan to these NFL games, right?
Yeah, I enjoy it, man. It reminds me of being in like a packed high school gym or something for a big game. Obviously, there's the open air and all those types of places, so it's cool.
All right. Before we get into the meat of this episode, we are brought to you by Tops Friendly Markets. 'Tis the season to save on groceries and all of your holiday gifts. Christmas bonus is underway at Tops. Shop at Tops and save $10 at all of your other favorite stores and restaurants. With over 25 gift cards to choose from, there's something for everyone on your list. And don't forget to treat yourself to some extra savings too. Be Santa's biggest little helper with Christmas bonus from Tops. All right, let's start with this quarterback position here, James.
What?
You have Anthony Richardson coming into year two. A lot of excitement. For as much excitement as there was for Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams, I felt like Anthony Richardson had this kind of mystique. We didn't get to see a ton of him last year. The injury kind of shortened things. And the great unknown of all right, what kind of year one to year two jump could we see? We're halfway through the season and he's been benched for Joe Flacco. From your perspective, what went wrong from Anthony? And were you in support of that move? Because we're going to talk about this last game, but it didn't look like everything was functioning at a high level with Joe in at quarterback.
Yeah, I'll start with Anthony being benched. It was a surprise, obviously. I thought that he would look a lot better this season. I think that he has to own it. The team, the coaches, from literally the top down, the owner down, this decision to bench him, his regression this season, all of those things. I think one of the things I can definitely put out there, and as I've talked about on other podcasts and other people around the building, is people talk about his work ethic. Is it as good as it should be and all that? I think he loves football. I think he works hard. I think that sometimes he can be a little bit naive. Mm-hmm. So it's not apathy. It's not like he doesn't care about football. It's just certain things. Obviously the tap out, which I was the one who asked him the question. And I'll admit, man, I did not know that this was going to be this huge thing. Mm-hmm. I remember in the moment, I was like, oh, it's a little weird, whatever. It was one play and we continued on. And then once he got posted to social media and I saw the reaction to it, I was like, oh, this is a thing. And then it was the first segment on ESPN, get up the next day. And I'm like, what is going on? And that's when it started to avalanche. And I was like, okay, that's a tough break. And so I would just push back a little, though, on all the things where it's oh, he hasn't prepared enough or he isn't working hard enough. It's well, you made him a 2-time captain his first 2 years. And you never heard any of this stuff until week 7 or 8 of this season. So, it is a bit concerning. But I will say again, just, getting to know Anthony a little bit, he is this affable. And sometimes even it can come off as a bit aloof. For example, after the Houston game, he goes 10 for 32, and he was asked about, how do you feel about being a passer in the NFL, where you are right now as a passer in the NFL? And he says, oh, I'm a great passer. I'm this, I'm that. And I'm like, you can't really say that after a game like that. And when your completion percentage is what it is, 44%, and I looked at all these different stats, right? He's the lowest in the league, whether he's blitzed or not blitzed, whether he's under pressure, not under pressure. Passing wise, it's not good. Now you can say I can be a great passer. I believe I am, and I can continue to work towards that. But you can't definitively say, I'm a great passer. Like, nah, man, like you got to kind of read the room. So I think some of that stuff is just, you being young and maybe not realizing, when you're the QB1, you're the face of the franchise. And so I would also throw out there people who are like, oh, he tapped out. He threw a 318-pound lineman off of his back on that same play where he tapped out. So it's almost like, well, if he just took the sack like a normal QB and got his breath, he'd still be, fine. And no one will be talking about, how much he loves football and is he a quitter, all these things. And so I just think he had a moment of just, judgment lapse. But again, talking to guys in the locker room, they all know, like, he puts his body on the line. Obviously, he's been banged up sometimes, but, you go from week 1 against Houston where he throws this moon ball to Alec Pierce, beautiful throw, one of the best throws I've ever seen in my life. He runs over, Jalen Petrie and another guy to score at the goal line, like 4th, and got to have it. And it's like, people don't do that and like not love the game or not willing to give everything for their teammates. And so, and then as far as the QB change, Colts fans know this. I have been vehemently against it, mainly because you don't have a plan now, quite frankly. Like you punching on your plan with Anthony Richardson. Yes, he's only 22, but age doesn't matter when it comes to contracts. He's going to year 3 after this, and you have to kind of figure out what you're going to do. Then Joe Flacco is 39, and, love Joe Cool, as the players call him, but I believe he's now, 8-25 in his last 41 starts, or my math might be off, actually. Is that right? 43. I'm sorry. 43 starts. And then on top of that, it's just tough to look at. Actually, I take that back. He's 8 for 17 in his last couple of starts. But my point is, I think with him, you don't know exactly what you're going to get. Like, not similar to Anthony, but like looking at Joe, he's been very hot in some moments, very cold in others. And I think people kind of forget how it went in Cleveland last year and what he had around him too. He had a lot of playmakers. He also had the number 1 defense in the NFL and one of the best defenses you'd see in the last few years. And then now you come to Indianapolis and it's like, you don't have that same defense. You don't have those same playmakers. Can you still make it happen? And then obviously, it is, a bit premature to say it's not working, but to come out there and have like your worst offensive performance of the season, a few days after you change quarterbacks, obviously, Matt, it's not going to help the narrative of why you made the move.
And it's not a surprise. I mean, this Minnesota defense has given quarterbacks like all season long a lot of problems. They disguise everything that they do. They have that kind of walk-up style. Yeah. It's really hard to deal with. And it's going to be from that one extreme to maybe another extreme against the Bills defense that plays this bend but don't break, really relying a lot of the time on their front 4 to get pressure. At one point this season, they were one of the lowest amount of blitzes in the league among defenses. Skill position wise around him, offensive line in front of him. What does he have to work with? Because obviously everybody knows Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, 2 really good players. Everybody knows Jonathan Taylor. The offensive line has been a strength of this team year in and year out. And, I went back and watched that game, and obviously when they had to pass in the 4th quarter, things broke down as, Joe was trying to, buy some time in there, and he's just not very fleet of foot. But what has he got working with him on this offense? What have you seen when he's been in the game this season?
Yeah, I will say that he can push the ball down the field. Unlike last year when Anthony got hurt and they had Gardner Minshew come in, the offense looked a lot different because Gardner just couldn't push the ball down the field. So every defense kind of knew, like, all right, as long as we don't, just completely break down on the back end, he's not going to beat us over the top. Whereas Joe can air it out, and he's done that. And he's, I think at the Jacksonville Jaguars game where he stepped in for Anthony was starting because Anthony was out, did a bunch of nothing for 3 quarters. In the 4th quarter, he found Alec Pierce for, 3 long catches. And I think Alec went over 100 yards in like literally 3 plays. And I was like, okay, that's, a good sign to see. But beyond that, I would say, with the offensive line, it was a bit skewed last week just because they had Matt Gonzalez in there at left tackle. He's the rookie out of Pitt. Ideally, you would like to see Bernard Ryman, their starting left tackle for the last few years, get out of concussion protocol, be available this week at home against the Bills. We'll see how that goes. We don't know just yet. So I will give Joe some grace there. He's working with, a rookie left tackle. They do have a rookie right guard starting in there. He will be the starter probably the rest of the season as long as he doesn't get hurt. Dalton Tucker, He filled in for Will Fries, who was playing really at a really high level. But Will Fries, basically broke his leg in one of the games, and so he's most likely done for the year. And so the offensive line, again, they have been pretty solid in pass pro. They've been pretty solid even when it comes to some of the run, stuff. It does look a lot differently without Anthony in there. I will say that. And so he has, some playmakers to work with. But one thing that has been kind of an Achilles heel for the Colts the last few years is that they don't really have a lot of tight end production. It's, every so often you'll see a big catch from Mo Cox or Colin Granson, but they have not had a consistent number one tight end. They just kind of have a group of them. And I mean, to be quite honest with you, I don't know if anybody outside of Indianapolis even knows who these guys really are because they don't really do much. I mean, you wouldn't pick them up in fantasy because they don't really catch the ball. And so that's one thing where it's like, man, if I've seen Shane Steichen work with tight ends in the past and really, get the best out of them and his quarterback because of it. He just doesn't have those options here in Indianapolis, and it can't hold this offense back. So, and then to kind of wrap this up, you mentioned Michael Pittman Jr. to start. He's kind of compromised right now. He is not the Michael Pittman Jr. that we know, who's a great possession catcher and body catcher and physical and all these things. He's dealing with a back injury, and he looks like he's dealing with a back injury, quite frankly. He just hasn't been himself at all. I mean, you look at his numbers through the first 8 games of the season, and this is a guy who, no matter who the quarterback has been here over the last, 4 or 5 years he's been here, he's always produced. And this is why I know he will never say it, but he's hurt. And he's dealing with a lot, with his back. And so you have a compromised Michael Pittman Jr. You have Josh Downs, who's a budding star. I would definitely say that. You have Alec Pierce, who's kind of hot and cold on the deep balls. And you have A.D. Mitchell, who's still trying to figure it out on the outside as well. It's just not this great collection of talent. I'm not saying it can't be, but it just isn't, obviously one of I would say one of the top end, wide receiver cores or pass catching groups in the league.
Very interesting stuff. We got to take a quick break. We're coming back to Turning Stone Resort Casino. Here's more about it.
What's up, everybody? Matt Parrino here with Ryan Talbot. We're the host of the Shout Buffalo Bills football podcast, and we have some big news. We're coming back to Turning Stone Resort Casino. That's right, New York Rec and Social Club, November 30th, the night before the Bills host the San Francisco 49ers. It is going to be a night of Bills football, talking, food, everything, Ryan. We cannot wait.
That's right, Matt. Nobody travels like the Bills Mafia. Come out and join us for the podcast and hang out with us after. The event is open to the public. Guests must be 18 years or older. Come out and let's get after it.
It's going to be a live edition of Shout a Buffalo Bills football podcast. We're previewing Bills versus 49ers. See you then.
James, watching this Colts team, the thing that their defense specifically, the thing that sticks out for me is speed at the linebacker position and on the outside, and then just size and physicality and pretty good quicks on the interior with Grover Stewart and obviously DeForest Buckner. Where is the strength of this defense? And do you feel like this is incrementally a better unit week after week, kind of settling in? Because I thought I heard somebody talking about them early in the season where, the offense, had some potential, but maybe the defense would hold them back. But watch them against Minnesota. I thought that they gave Sam Darnold fits. Yeah,
they definitely had one of their better games from a takeaway standpoint. They tied their season high with 3 takeaways against Sam Darnold. Obviously had the forced fumble with Grover Stewart. He joked with us. He was just like, I want to destroy the guy across from me. And once I get on my track, ain't nobody getting me off of it, basically. So he thought he would get flagged for hitting Sam in the head. And he more or less kind of said like, oh, I thought they got me, but they didn't. And they picked the flag up. And so they go and score on that play. Obviously that was a big play in the game. But I think when you talk about progress with this defense, you have to kind of look at who they've been facing. And again, the takeaways was good, but then he also gave over 400 yards of offense, which was, not good. And eventually part of that is also the offense doing nothing. So you're out there for forever and eventually you're going to just give way. But there have been some leaky issues with this defense. And one of the things I was looking at last week going into the Minnesota game was that once the Colts entering that game were maybe 13th in the league as far as missed tackles. So like it wasn't like an egregious, terrible thing. But when they do miss tackles, they give like the 4th most yards after that. And so I say that to say, if the Bills, like a Keon Coleman, who can be, tough to bring down and things like that, Ray Davis, obviously some of the things that he's been able to do, if he can make a guy miss, they usually can get to that second level, and sometimes they can just go. So that's one of the things where talk about this linebacker group. Yeah, they're fast, but it's like if they miss, man, they have a hard time kind of, reacting to that. And sometimes the angles aren't the best as far as tackling. And so that's definitely like an issue I think the Bills can kind of try to exploit. And on top of that, just to be quite frank with you, they haven't faced a lot of great quarterbacks. Zaire Franklin, the Colts linebacker, who I respect a ton, he was telling us, Justin Jefferson got off against us. He had over 100 yards. I mean, it's Justin Jefferson. He's also just a great player, wide receiver one as far as anybody in the NFL, right? But he told us, we held Tyreek Hill to one catch. He's the best player in the world, and that's his opinion. But in my mind, I'm like, well, yeah, you held him to one catch against Snoop Huntley and Tim Boyle. Like, Josh Allen ain't those guys. Josh Allen is a dog. I mean, in my opinion, don't get me started on where I will put Josh Allen as far as quarterbacks go. It's very high for those listening. I'm sick of the slander.
Continue. I'm sure the listenership would love to hear it.
I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm in like the Indianapolis Colts bubble where they've, more or less been spoiled with Peyton Manning and obviously Andrew Luck. But I'm like, look, y'all standards are so high sometimes y'all forget like greatness when you see it. And so I'll leave it at that. But all that to say, I think that when the Colts have faced better passing quarterbacks, they've kind of struggled to contain a lot of those, playmakers and a lot of those, quarterbacks, whether it was even Caleb Williams, he went off against, the Colts and obviously had some turnovers there, but he went for over 300 yards, had a huge game. CJ Stroud, has got him both times. And then obviously, Sam Darnold, even though he had some turnovers, was still able to move the ball. And so I say all that to say, Josh Allen isn't one of those guys who like has to have everything perfect to complete a pass or to throw something deep or to make something happen. And so I'm just curious to see how this Colts defense, which again has been better in spots this year and definitely is better than it was at the beginning of the year. I'm just curious how it reacts to a guy who can, just change the game. And so we'll see. But I definitely think that the linebacker group is kind of hit or miss sometimes. They got a lot of tackles and things like that, but they've also missed, a decent amount of tackles. And I think the front of this defense is ultimately what they're going to hang their hat on always. And they've kind of struggled to get pressure sometimes. Part of that was DeForest Buckner being out for a while on IR. He's back. But you would like to see like the rookie Latu get going a bit more. Dio, Dangbo, things like that. They just haven't been able to get home a ton this season. And we'll see, obviously, if that changes against the Bills, because like any quarterback, you want to try to get after Josh Allen, because if you give him too much time, yeah, he can be Superman, but he also can just stand in the pocket and pick you apart.
Jonathan Taylor, he's averaging close to 5 a carry on the season, 3.7 per carry against the Vikings last week. And, you look at a Bills offense right now that has Curtis Samuel playing through a shoulder injury, didn't look like himself last game. He's had honestly, he's been hurt kind of all year. He hasn't looked great at any point. We're going to talk a little bit about that on the Wednesday show. And then Keon Coleman, we're waiting to hear the latest on a wrist injury that he suffered at the end of last game. He may not even be available this weekend. Amari Cooper missed last game with a wrist injury of his own, so we'll be tracking that throughout this week. So this is a banged up wide receiving room. When you say all what you were saying about, the missed tackles and the ability to kind of make plays after the catch, I think of a guy like Khalil Shakir, who is amongst the league leaders in yards after the catch. This could be a big game for him, but man, it's the Bills are really banged up right now. And I feel like Indianapolis can maybe potentially find themselves in a good spot against a team that, doesn't have all of its playmakers, which then gets me thinking, all right, this could be a James Cook game. How do you feel like this run defense in totality has done it? They look great against Jonathan Taylor, but how has it been all season?
Yeah, I think that, there are some things that you can try to exploit with this Colts run defense, mainly because, they like the Colts run defense. I do think that they've been okay at times, but again, they can kind of give way to have some guys have some big games. I remember when they faced the Jaguars, it was like, Tank Bigsby had never had a 100-yard rushing game. Well, he had one against them. They faced the Packers and everyone knew like Malik Willis ain't throwing 20 passes today, and they still ran down their throat. And so Joe Mixon's had some big games against them as well. So I definitely think that there's an opportunity there for the Bills to get the ground game going, because even when teams have basically definitively told them we're going to run the ball, they've been able to run it fairly well. And on the flip side of that, with JT trying to get going, one of the issues with taking out Anthony Richardson, and I get it, again, I've been vehemently against the decision to bench him. However, I also can see with my eyes and with all of the, stats and advanced stats and things like that, he's not a great passer in the NFL, and it's not really, functional. However, when you take him out of the game, their run game, and Jonathan Taylor in particular, takes a big hit. I want to say he's averaging over, 5 yards, very close to 5 yards a carry when he's on the field with Anthony Richardson. When he's not, it's almost like a yard and a half less. And so, and a big reason why is, man, it's not rocket science. You're not running zone reads and things like that and RPOs and this stuff like that with Joe Flacco. The defense doesn't have to factor in, oh man, Joe Flacco might keep us around the edge and just, burn us for a 12-yard run. No. And so you give some of that up for more competency in the passing game. But again, if you're not able to move the ball in the passing game, you really suffer in the run game. And that to me is where it kind of, there's some give and take there. The Colts came out against the Vikings and had their lowest rushing total of the season. And then also you had Jonathan Taylor, who I believe tied his season low in rushing yards as well. So again, you would love to see JT get going. You would love to see him take some pressure off of whoever the quarterback is back there, whether it's Anthony or Joe Flacco. But in this case, when it's not Anthony, you can't really, turn to Joe and say, okay, well, we're going to dial up some QB draws. Like, no. So we'll see how it goes. And I would expect it, again, to be better than it was against the Vikings, just because, we've known what Brian Flores can do to any quarterback in this league, but I just don't know how much better it's going to be. Just given that, again, with Joe Flacco, there's a reason why every team passed on making him the starting quarterback. Even after the Renaissance in Cleveland last year, there were no teams that were willing to do that coming into this year to make him a week 1 starter. There's a reason for that. It's because, it can be a little bit of a bumpy ride.
The trade deadline is such a interesting day to be doing this with that hovering over us. And Bills flying all over the place right now. Jonathan Mingo is going to the Cowboys. Khalil Herbert was traded to Cincinnati a little bit earlier. Zadarius Smith off to the Lions, which I think we've known about for a little bit more than a day.
Worst kept secret, right?
Yeah. But for the Colts, they're in this kind of like strange place. I mean, I've seen stuff out there like, will they entertain trading Anthony Richardson at the deadline? And, do they want to become buyers at 4 and 5 with the injuries that the Texans have suffered? It's almost like, why not take a run at the division? But do they have the horses? Where do you fall on the approach? You kind of touched on it earlier about like, what's the plan now? Like if you were Ballard, like what would be the plan? Like, how are you approaching this trade deadline?
Yeah. Well, if I was Chris Ballard, I probably would make a trade because he's only made one in-season trade in his 8-year tenure with the Colts, and that was when Nyheim Hines basically asked to be out to go to Buffalo, and they got Zach Moss back. And obviously, no one could see the future that Nyheim Hines would have, the jet ski accident, and Zach Moss would end up going off here and kind of, basically he had like a year and a half audition to show people he could be a running back 1, and he ended up getting paid pretty, decently for the running back market with Cincinnati moving on. But that's the only time Chris Ballard has ever pulled the trigger on a trade during the season. And I guess in a very cynical way, I could say, you all said you're trying to win now. You said the reason why you punted on Anthony Richardson's future, more or less, was to win now. And so to me, just go all in then. Like, it doesn't matter if you have any draft capital left. You're trying to win now. I mean, your defense, playing devil's advocate, they're older. These guys are already paid. Like, they're not getting any younger. DeForest Buckner, Kenny Moore, Zaire Franklin, like the top guys on your defense, they're not getting any younger. So if you are going to go chase this thing and you see Houston kind of faltering and dealing with some terrible offensive line issues, then you go out there and try to get, maybe a David Njoku, a tight end to help boost that room. Or do you go out there and try to get perhaps another DN because, you've had so much attrition due to injuries on your defensive line? Or maybe you go out there and try to get another quarterback because you're kind of depleted there or you don't have the depth or experience there. Will it happen? Quite frankly, I do not think so, just because it's just not what the Colts do, man. They've been a very conservative style team underneath Chris Ballard. And even then, just dating back to the offseason, it was like, okay, if you thought you were in win now mode, why did you all sit on $20 million in cap space? Like, why didn't you go out and try to make every possible upgrade? And I'm not saying that every time you spend money, it works. I mean, quite frankly, when you spend a ton of money in the offseason, it usually doesn't work. But what's the holdup? Like, why are you even trying to sit on this money that, you could have used? And then at the very least, you're saying, hey, I tried and it failed, but they really haven't tried to make any moves. I mean, their biggest, seriously, I wrote it all summer, and I'm going to sound like a crazy person now, but it's the truth. Their biggest offseason addition was a healthy Anthony Richardson. That was it. And that's what they kind of bet on this team being elevated from. And now that he's on the bench, it's like, what do you do? Where do you go from here? So in the real world, after I've gone in fantasy land and what I wouldn't do and things like that, I just don't really see how you make a move after you don't really have an answer at quarterback. And I think it's bad for any franchise to make a ton of moves if you just don't know what you're doing at quarterback. And quite frankly, right now, the Colts look like they're a team that doesn't know what they're doing. You thought you were going to start Anthony Richardson. Oh, it's about the future. Now it's about the present with Joe Flacco. But now he doesn't look good. Now you're 4-5, and it's like the clock's ticking, man. So, for me, I guess in the clicks game, hey, make a trade. Let's talk about it. Let's get people riled up to see, who's right or wrong. And I never know what's a good trade or a bad trade. I'm not a GM, but I will say just.
But you could play one on The Athletic.
Man, look. Trust me, I do. I mean, I am the guy when I get an assignment from one of my editors and like, hey, we need like predictions, this and that. I'm like, all right, I'm going to choose like at least one outlandish prediction just to have fun. I did I remember when they were trying to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback, did a huge piece on like, could they go get Lamar Jackson? It's like, no, they're not going to go spend all this money, guaranteed money on him. They're not going to do it, but it was a fun exercise. So, I just think that, looking at how things really go here, if there is going to be a trade, it won't be something that's super headlining. It'll be something where you're just like, okay, I guess he had to do something. But no, man, I think it's going to be pretty stagnant at the deadline for the Colts, and then they're going to just kind of see where they go from here.
Great stuff. Shout's been brought to you by Tops Friendly Markets this season. Let Tops do the cooking, and you'll be the MVP. Visit shop.topsmarkets.com. And elevate your food game with a great selection of custom cakes, desserts, pizzas, sandwiches, fresh fruit, cheese trays, fried chicken, and so much more. Score great deals in time for kickoff at shop.topsmarkets.com. James Boyd, thank you so much. Let everybody know where they can find your work this week and beyond throughout the football season.
Well, you can follow me at Romeoville Kid. I grew up in Romeoville, Illinois. For those who wonder why the heck is my name that, it was a joke back in college, and it kind of just stuck. So now everyone calls me Romeoville Kid. But that's all socials. And then obviously you can read my stuff at theathletic.com. I'll have something on the Colts trade deadline, whether they make a move or they don't make a move. And obviously I'll be around to write about what happens when they face the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen, who, again, I enjoy watching. When Josh Allen is on my TV, I am a Josh Allen watcher. Just throwing that out there. So don't hate me. I'm not a Josh Allen hater at all. I respect greatness.
Well, we respect greatness on Shout as well, and you brought the greatness today, my friend. We will be back on Wednesday with Ryan, the Staples Show. We'll see you then, everybody. Take care.